So the third step in the famous acronym is messaging, the M. And I want to explain the two documents that you need for your crowdfunding campaign when you're looking to contact the media. You are going to need a press release and you're going to need an email pitch. Now I want to break down each of those because there's actually a lot of confusion about each of these documents. Now the purpose of the email pitch is to sell a journalist on why they should cover your crowdfunding campaign. The purpose of the press release is not to sell a journalist on this. The purpose of the press release is that once a journalist has decided to cover your crowdfunding campaign, to make it as easy as possible for them to do so. And I want to explain a secret about why this is important. Many people, when they think about these large publications and people contributing to them, they think these journalists get paid hundreds of dollars per article. And the reality is that's not necessarily true. The majority of these writers, in many cases, are paid, let's say, $20 an article. And these are writers who are living in New York, living in San Francisco, and other places. Now, I want to let that sink in for a moment and what the implications for that are. And one of the implications, especially if you're living in New York, which is very expensive, is that you have to write a lot of articles. So if a journalist sees your crowdfunding campaign pitch, they're going to know right away, hey, is that article going to take me 20 minutes to write? Is it going to take me 5 hours to write? And there's a natural incentive to try to reduce the amount of time as much as possible. So your goal when you're launching this crowdfunding campaign is to basically do a lot of that work ahead of time so it reduces the amount of friction as much as possible. And I have example press releases and emails in this presentation. But it's important to keep that in mind, kind of the idea and philosophy behind it. With the email pitch, there are 4 things I want you to keep in mind for your crowdfunding campaign. And the first is to lead with social proof. Now, what does social proof mean? The reality is the majority of writers that you contact, you won't have a prior relationship with. It's impossible to. There are just thousands and thousands of journalists. So the idea with social proof is to include information about yourself that they can infer information from. So as an example of type 1 social proof, let's say you have your MBA from Harvard, or you used to be an engineer at Google. You went through a very prestigious accelerator program, such as Platzi going through Y Combinator as an example. These are all things that make your profile stand out and people can infer information from. Maybe I don't know you, but I know that you've been a part of this organization, so I know that you work hard, etc. So it's important to lead with that. So as an example of how this would work, if I was emailing about my crowdfunding campaign, I would say, hi, Sarah, my name is Kamanagusa. I'm a global mentor at 5 Minute Startups. And even if she doesn't know me, she can infer certain things about me. The second type of social proof is actually on the opposite end of the spectrum. And this relates to many people who are just starting out. And these type 2 social proof are things that might not be super impressive, but that are very unique to you. So as an example, let's say you are a 16-year-old developer, or you are a 65-year-old founder, or you used to be a well-known soccer player, as an example. These make for very interesting storylines and make your profile stand out. So the other day, a 16-year-old wrote me, and he said, TechCrunch would never want to cover my company. I'm only 16 years old. And I said, you don't understand. That's why they would want to cover you. There are not many 16-year-olds writing TechCrunch every day. So maybe maybe your company is based out of a country that isn't normally on TechCrunch. This isn't a disadvantage. This is actually an advantage that you can use to your own benefit, especially for your crowdfunding campaign. As I mentioned before with Amplify, social proof is so important because for your crowdfunding campaign and media coverage, because you haven't yet accomplished anything. When you contact the media, you're basically saying we're raising funding to eventually do kind of fulfill this mission of ours. So anything you can use for social proof is very important there. The second thing to keep in mind is to include links to your social profiles. So personally, I really recommend LinkedIn. And why is this important? Unfortunately, every day there are many stories being pitched to the media that turn out to be fake. And By including a link to your social profile, you're basically saying, you know what, my name is Conrad, I'm making this pitch, I'm putting my name behind this pitch. You can see where I went to university, you can see my connections, etc. And that's very important because a big fear, again, is from a writer's perspective, they will write an article and it will turn out to be fake. The third thing is to address a journalist by their name in the email, particularly in the subject line. You're going to dramatically, and we have numbers to prove this, improve your open rate by just including a journalist's name. And it's also important because a worry journalists have is spam. That they'll be sent, someone will send an email to 5,000 people and be seeing them on this. And by just including a name, you can kind of take away that concern. And the last thing is to communicate for your crowdfunding campaign via email to the media. So another secret is at VentureBeat, about half our stories written every day were sent to tips@venturebeat.com. And that's very important to keep in mind. Many people think these emails aren't read. I don't recommend phone calls only because some journalists don't mind, but many will really be bothered by that. So just to recap, when you're contacting the media with your email pitch, in the subject line, include as an example, say, "Hi, Sarah," the name of the writer. "My name is Conrad, mentor at 5-Minute Startups, about a crowdfunding campaign launch." And when I introduce myself in the email, I'm going to include a link to my LinkedIn profile as well. Now, the press release, as we mentioned before, the goal is to do a lot of the work ahead of time. And let's talk about some tangible examples. So for SpeedX with the crowdfunding campaign, we could probably tell ahead of time. Many people don't know, as an example, again, this is a pure example, the bicycle market is, people spend $500 million a year on bicycles, etc. Now we could actually find that information ahead of time, include links to the surveys online, and put that in the press release. And by doing that, you're basically helping a journalist write an article because you are doing the work ahead of time. So all of you can find those data points about each of your own industries. And the one thing I want to mention with the press release is to use data whenever possible. So sometimes for a crowdfunding campaign, someone will say, this campaign is so interesting, this is such a huge market. And it's very hard to know what that means because there's no number attached to it. And if you want to see examples of press release, we have a number of examples there. They follow a very specific structure, something to keep in mind. But I do recommend an email and a press release when contacting the media. So some of you might be wondering, how can I know the name or the email of the journalist that I'm contacting? I think the first thing is, in this Platzi presentation, I have a list of journalist emails that we spent close to 100 hours collecting that each of you can use and access. I think the other thing is, and many times, let's say somebody's email is sarah@techcrunch.com, you'll be able to kind of infer their name from the email address, which is really important. And the fourth step, the outreach in the O in famous, is what we're about to talk about, which is basically once you have the email and the press release, how do you actually get that from there to an article published online about your campaign? So stay tuned for this.